Hi, this is Father Farrell, this time coming to you from my dining room, a change of venue over my office last week. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. As you know, the world has changed in the past few weeks, and in ways and to an extent that no one as yet fully understands. For the past few decades in the U.S., as I've said before, we've been running a social experiment in greed and lack of empathy. I remember in the early 80s when I had just started college, stock trader Ivan Boesky told us that greed was healthy. I also remember a few years later when he went to jail for insider trading, but he was merely a harbinger of the direction our society was heading, and his incarceration, though justified, sadly did nothing to change our overall course. The gospel today sheds some light on this. The Pharisees display a lack of empathy towards the man whom Christ healed of blindness. They are more concerned with Christ not obeying the Sabbath than with the miraculous benefit to the man. Imagine if someone healed you of your greatest ailment, and that person then was accused of practicing medicine without a license and threatened with punishment. The Pharisees know that their power, their position in society, is based on everyone else's obeying the rules that they promote. So Christ's teaching that our first concern is always compassion, to love our neighbors as ourselves, threatens to overturn this structure. When a rigid social hierarchy meets pragmatic love, conflict results. The Pharisees had justifications, of course, for their behavior. People always have justifications. Rather than leaving the judgment of Christ up to God, the Pharisees instead present themselves as the defenders of God. Listen to the arrogance in that statement. Defenders of God, as if God needs our defense. What God asks of us is not that we defend God, but that we do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God. This is particularly challenging for people who live in fear of others, fear of what others think, of what they might do. Such people feel the need always to be defending their social position rather than to uphold the good of all. I've been watching the newer version of Poldark, a series on Masterpiece Theatre about a Cornishman, Ross Poldark, who returns to England after fighting against the Americans in the Revolution. But it's okay, because he said he was actually fighting on the wrong side. As a result of the war, the English economy went into recession. Ross Poldark seeks ways not only to support himself, but also to lift up the villagers around him. He opens a mine and he pays decent wages to the miners so that all can live, even though the mine struggles to produce. Meanwhile, another family in the village, the Warlegans, seek to enrich themselves at the expense of others. They loan money to those in financial distress and then use it to manipulate them and to gain control over the village. They impoverish people. Most of what they do is, of course, perfectly legal, but it's driven by greed. And behind that, fear rather than compassion. They do not love their neighbors as themselves. They would not want to be treated as they treat others. Always worrying about what others think of them, they seek money to gain social approval and are unable to understand why most people prefer Ross Poldark to them. I was reminded of this when I read that Matt and Noah Colvin of Tennessee had bought up 17,700 bottles of hand sanitizer. I'm sure you read that as well. And had begun selling them on Amazon and eBay from $8 to $70 a piece. As with all who are self-seeking, he had an excuse. He argued that he was fixing inefficiencies in the marketplace and should be paid well for his efforts. Well, the marketplace might approve, but God will not. Once Amazon and eBay banned him, and he came under investigation for price gouging, He decided to abandon the marketplace to its inefficiencies and to donate the bottles to a church to be passed on to those in need throughout Tennessee. In all three of these cases, the Pharisees, the Warlegans, the fictional Warlegans, and the Colvins, the deciding factor is the same, and that is whether the people in question truly are thinking about the well-being of all, or are they making excuses in order to serve themselves? Simply put, are they compassionate, or are they afraid? The choice ever before us is between empathy for others and selfishness. And selfishness increases in proportion to our fear. We're seeing examples of this all around us today. Some are frightened and are desperate to protect themselves and only themselves, whereas others are finding ways to take proper precautions, yet to reach out to their neighbors and communities. Not only individuals, but societies also tend to lean one way or the other, and this changes over time, back and forth. Some societies encourage behavior based on fear, whereas others encourage greater compassion. The timing may seem odd, but the new happiness report is out. It ranks countries in terms of overall happiness, though I think a sense of well-being is really what they're studying, but they call it happiness. The report bases what they call happiness on 6 significant factors: GDP per capita, social support, life expectancy, freedom to make life choices, generosity, and corruption levels. Happiness, says John F. Hallowell, an editor of the annual report, is not about expressing emotion, but is a measure of general satisfaction with life and, more important, the confidence that one lives in a place where people take care of one another. He adds that although happy people wouldn't have the highest smile factor, they do trust each other and care about each other, and that's what fundamentally makes for a better life, he says. Those who live in fear, whether overt or suppressed, suffer from being ill at ease. And the greater our insecurity that we will not have our needs met, the greater our fears. Those needs may fall anywhere along a spectrum from the physical to the emotional, which is why happiness is lower in countries both with a low GDP and those with low social support. In both, selfishness tends to rule. People think that by pursuing our own well-being, we will maximize our results by not wasting precious time thinking about others. But the truth is, when we do this, we alienate ourselves. We deny ourselves something that is fundamental to our sense of well-being: connection with others. The more alienated we become, the less we sense that our society cares for us, and the more anger we carry. Now, people have made an unsubstantiated connection between violent video games and acts of violence. The reality is, violent video games are a symptom, not a cause. Whereas some channel their anger into such games, others actually act it out. Christ taught us to obey God not in order to enforce some arbitrary rule of an uncaring God, but to help us to flourish as the children of a loving God. When a crisis occurs, it brings out the best and the worst in people. For some reason, when people realize that no one is protected from disaster, however, that misfortune is visited upon the good and the bad alike, they begin to identify more with others, to connect over our shared impotence and fragility. I'm told, for example, that people became much friendlier in Manhattan after 9/11. I certainly witnessed many acts of compassion and grace when I lived there from 2007 to 2010. So this current crisis is also an opportunity. And as I know many of you are already praying, you've been telling me this, it is possible that it can move us away from our experiment in greed towards a society of compassion in which we consider the well-being of the whole, a society in which people feel valued and connected. Things may get worse before they get better, but God can bring good out of it. Perhaps people will even realize that they need God. Amen.